Most people think they already know what pottery is. Clay shaped into bowls, fired in a kiln, decorated with a few designs. But step far back in time, before machines, before metal tools, before thermometers or industrial kilns, and the story becomes much bigger. Across North America, entire nations crafted pottery that wasn't just functional, but engineered with a level of clarity and precision that still challenges experts today. These vessels weren't fragile relics. They were strong enough to carry water long distances, stable enough to sit directly in a fire, and beautiful enough to carry the identity of whole communities. Walk through the deserts of the Southwest, and you'll find black on white ceramics so thin they ring like bells when tapped. Travel east into river valleys, where shell-tempered pottery resisted cracking under heat and pressure. Move north into the forests, and you'll uncover thick-walled cooking vessels built to sit in embers without collapsing. Go to the coast, and you'll find watertight, pitch-lined containers crafted for storage, trade, and travel. Every region shaped clay differently, because every region demanded different strengths. They came from careful trial and error, deep study of soil, and firing methods that relied on observation rather than instruments. Some pots were made to withstand boiling temperatures. Others were designed to preserve foods for months. Some carried symbols that recorded ideas, migrations, calendars, and teachings. Some were purely functional, rugged, thick, and built for constant use. Others were masterpieces, shaped with such precision that modern potters struggle to replicate their balance. If you've ever wondered how ancient people turned raw earth into something so durable, if you've ever wanted to know how these pots were engineered to survive fire, travel, and time, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, because every day we uncover the technologies that helped entire nations shape the world from nothing but land, heat, and skill. When people first pick up an ancient pot, they often see just a container, a simple tool meant to hold water, stew, or stored foods. But to understand Native American pottery, you have to strip away that modern assumption. These vessels were not basic household items. They were engineered solutions, born from landscapes that demanded resilience and adaptability. Every pot you see today survived not just centuries in the earth, but an entire lifetime of use before that. Across North America, pottery filled roles that were vital for daily life. It boiled food when metal pots didn't exist. It stored seeds and grains through seasons when survival depended on planning. It purified water by allowing sediment to settle. Some vessels even served as transport containers, carried across miles of trade routes that connected distant regions. These weren't fragile objects sitting on shelves. They were the backbone of community survival. And yet, they were beautiful. That combination, function and artistry, is what sets indigenous pottery apart. Makers shaped each vessel with purpose, but they also added designs that recorded ideas, marked family identity, or reflected the landscape around them. A bowl might show flowing lines representing rivers. A jar might carry patterns inspired by storms, mountains, migration paths, or everyday life. Art wasn't separate from engineering. The two were woven together. What makes these creations even more impressive is how they were made. Without pottery wheels, without metal tools, without industrial kilns. Everything was done by hand, using only what the land provided. Clay was gathered from riverbanks or eroded cliffs, tempered with crushed rock or shell, and shaped with patience and accuracy. Potts' crafts undersells what they truly were. They were durable, dependable, and thoughtfully designed, the result of generations of refinement. Pottery wasn't just part of life, it helped sustain it. Pottery begins long before the clay is shaped. It starts with knowing the land well enough to find the right soil in the first place. For ancient potters across North America, gathering clay wasn't a casual task. It required experience, judgment, and an understanding of how different types of earth behaved under heat, pressure, and daily use. Some clays were smooth and naturally plastic, perfect for forming intricate designs. Others were gritty, ideal for heavy cooking vessels meant to withstand repeated exposure to fire. Potters learned to test raw clay by rolling it, bending it, or even letting a small piece dry to see if it cracked. A single riverbank could offer multiple clay sources, each suited for a different kind of pot. But raw clay was rarely used alone. Nearly every region relied on temper, a material mixed into the clay to improve strength and prevent cracking. This is where indigenous engineering truly shines. The temper wasn't random. It was chosen based on what the pot needed to do. Sand added grit and helped pots withstand heating and cooling cycles. Crushed rock strengthened cooking vessels that sat directly in embers. Ground shell, especially in the southeast and Midwest, made pottery lighter, more heat-resistant, and remarkably durable. Crushed pottery shards, known as grog, recycled older vessels and created new clay that resisted warping. Each region developed its own recipe. Clay from the desert southwest needed different treatment than clay from the humid southeast, or clay from icy northern forests. Some potters soaked their clay for days to remove impurities. Others kneaded it repeatedly, folding it until it reached the perfect consistency. Microwave mattered. Potters often used water from the same source each time because they understood how minerals affected the clay's behavior. A pot was ready to be shaped. Its material had already gone through a process of selection, testing, mixing, and refining. Nothing about it was accidental. These makers weren't just sculpting clay. They were manipulating the chemistry of the earth with accuracy that modern potters still study. Shaping a pot is only half the story. The moment that truly decides its fate happens in the fire. Too much heat, and the vessel warps or fractures. Too little, and it crumbles under the first boiling stew. With no thermometers, no metal kilns, and no controlled gas flames, Native American potters mastered firing methods that required steady hands, sharp eyes, and complete command of heat. Process began with understanding fuel. Different woods produced different temperatures. Some burned slow and steady. Others flared quickly and had to be controlled. In the Southwest, potters used desert shrubs and juniper to create hot, consistent fires. Along the coasts and in the forests, hardwoods produced dense coals ideal for long cooks. Fuel wasn't just fuel. It was a tool, chosen with care. Most pottery was fired in open-air kilns, but don't be fooled by the simplicity. These firing pits were engineered for precision. Pots were placed upside down, propped with sherds, and surrounded with fuel arranged in exact layers. Airflow was controlled by digging shallow channels the fire could breathe through. A good firing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and watched closely from start to finish. Some cultures used updraft or trench kilns, where heat rose through buried tunnels. Others fired pots inside covered mounds of earth or dung, creating a contained environment that held heat for hours. The firing method shaped the final color of the pottery: red, black, white, or mottled. These effects weren't accidents. Potters controlled oxygen levels by adjusting how tightly the fuel covered the pots. More oxygen meant bright reds. Less oxygen created polished black surfaces, like those famously crafted in the Pueblo world. Suppressed firing took experience, patience, and confidence. Potters judged temperature by sound, the crackle of fuel, and by watching smoke shift from white to dark. They knew exactly when to feed the fire and when to let it rest. The brilliance of these techniques lies in their control without instruments. Fire became a partner, not a wild force. And through it, clay turned into vessels capable of lasting centuries. Once a pot was shaped and fired, it was more than a container. It carried meaning, identity, and purpose woven directly into its surface. Across North America, pottery wasn't decorated simply to look attractive. Every line, every pattern, and every carved or painted element served a role. Sometimes practical, sometimes ceremonial, sometimes personal, and often layered with multiple intentions at once. In the Southwest, ancestral Puebloan potters created black-on-white designs with astonishing precision. Triangles, spirals, and stepped patterns weren't random. They reflected movement, seasons, rainfall, migration routes, or stories tied to everyday life. A bowl might show repeating patterns that guided the eye in a rhythm, turning the act of eating into a moment of reflection. Some vessels held grids so precise they seem almost mathematical, revealing a deep sense of structure. Move east into the southeastern and Mississippi Valley regions, and pottery becomes a canvas for carved and engraved motifs. Some vessels feature swirling lines representing water or wind. Others show animals, hands, eyes, wings, or geometric elements connected to leadership, trade, or community identity. These designs often wrapped around the whole vessel, intended to be seen as the pot was lifted, turned, and used. In the eastern woodlands, surface texture itself became a kind of language. Pots were stamped, cord-marked, or paddled with carved tools that left repeating impressions. At first, these patterns seemed purely decorative, but they also made the pots easier to grip, helped cooking heat distribute evenly, and strengthened the walls during firing. Even the absence of decoration held meaning. Some Great Plains and Northern groups built thick, undecorated cooking vessels designed entirely for function. Heavy, fire-resistant, and built for daily use without fanfare. Their simplicity reflected a focus on durability rather than visual expression. Every pot carried purpose. Some were made for ceremonies, some for storage, some for long cooking days, some for trade. And many held both everyday use and quiet messages understood by the people who made and used them. Pottery wasn't just art. It was identity poured into clay. One of the most remarkable things about Native American pottery is how dramatically it changes from region to region. The land itself acted as a teacher, shaping each community's approach to clay, temper, design, firing style, and purpose. When you look at pottery from across North America, you're not just seeing artistic variation. You're seeing how people read their environment and responded with precision. In the Southwest, the dry climate allowed clay vessels to dry slowly and evenly, encouraging thin walls and detailed painting. Potters took advantage of fine clays found in desert washes, creating pottery with crisp edges and bold black-on-white or red-on-buff designs. The heat of the region helped support high-temperature firings, resulting in pottery that was light yet surprisingly durable. Shapes like seed jars, cooking bowls, and storage canisters reflected a lifestyle built around farming, long-term storage, and careful water management. Travel north into the Great Basin and Plains, and pottery shifts. Here, mobility mattered. Groups that traveled frequently crafted thicker, more rugged vessels that could withstand open-fire cooking and constant movement. Decorations were minimal, and function dominated. Pots were built with wide bases to stay stable over embers, and reinforced rims that resisted cracking when exposed to uneven heat. Move into the eastern woodlands, and the climate changes everything again. Clay from river valleys was rich, but required temper to avoid cracking. Potters mixed in sand, crushed rock, or shell to strengthen their vessels. The humid environment meant slower drying times, so makers developed cord-marked surfaces that allowed moisture to escape while adding grip and texture. These pots were perfect for stews, broths, and slow-cooked meals central to woodland diets. Then there's the Southeast, home to some of the most advanced pottery engineering in the ancient world. Tempering with finely ground shell created vessels that were lightweight, durable, and able to handle rapid heating. Carved and engraved designs flourished here, producing visually stunning pieces that traveled far along trade routes. Each different kind of pot, and every community rose to the challenge with creativity and precision. When archaeologists uncover pottery that has been buried for 1,000 years, the first question is always the same. How did it last this long? The answer lies in engineering choices so deliberate that these vessels became some of the most resilient artifacts on Earth. Far from fragile, ancient Native American pottery was built to endure fire, pressure, constant use, and time itself. The biggest factors was tempering. By adding crushed shell, sand, grog, or stone, potters prevented cracking during both cooking and firing. Shell tempering, used widely in the Southeast, fused with clay during firing and created a strong, flexible matrix. This allowed pots to heat quickly without bursting, something even modern ceramics sometimes struggle with. Grog temper, made from recycled pottery, created walls that resisted thermal shock and lasted through years of daily cooking. Then came surface treatments. Burnishing, polishing the pot with a smooth stone, compressed the clay particles, making the pot more water-resistant and durable. Cord marking, common in northern and eastern regions, strengthened outer walls and reduced cracking during drying. Some groups coated vessels with plant resins or pitch, adding an extra layer of protection for carrying water or for storage. Firing technique played a critical role. Instead of relying on uniform industrial kilns, ancient potters learned how to create consistent heat using fuel, airflow, and timing. The result was pottery that vitrified just enough to become strong, yet not so much that it turned brittle. Engineering choices created vessels that could boil stews day after day, travel long distances, survive storms, and, centuries later, emerge from the soil almost untouched. Before a pot ever touched the fire, before it carried water or cooked a stew, it existed first in the hands of a maker who understood exactly how clay behaves. Native American pottery wasn't shaped with wheels or metal tools. It was formed through techniques that depended entirely on touch, pressure, angle, moisture, and timing. The tools were simple, but the skill behind them was anything but. The most widespread method was coiling. Long ropes of clay were rolled by hand, then stacked and smoothed until the walls rose evenly. This wasn't a rushed process. Makers controlled thickness with their fingertips, keeping every coil consistent so the pot dried without collapsing. The inside was shaped first, then the outside was refined until both surfaces matched perfectly. A well-made coil pot didn't show its layers. The walls merged into one solid form. Some regions favored pinch construction, especially for small bowls and cups. A single lump of clay was pressed and shaped between thumb and fingers, expanded gradually, and thinned with rhythmic turns of the hand. These pinch pots look simple today, but the balance required to make them functional took real experience. In the southeast and eastern woodlands, paddle and anvil techniques dominated. A smooth stone, the anvil, supported the inside of the pot, while a carved wooden paddle shaped the outside. Each strike compressed the clay, strengthened the structure, and left patterned textures that still fascinate researchers. Those repeating marks weren't accidental. Each paddle carried specific designs carved for grip, decoration, or even heat distribution. Other tools were equally straightforward. A piece of gourd for scraping and smoothing. A river stone for burnishing. A curved rib of bone for refining rims. Plant fibers for adding texture. None of these tools were complex, Yet they allowed potters to create vessels with remarkable consistency. Precision came from hands that knew how to read clay, its softness, its limits, and the moment it was ready for the next step. In pottery, the land provided the materials, but human skill shaped the outcome. A finished pot was never just placed on a shelf and admired. It entered daily life immediately, and from that moment forward, it served roles far more varied than most modern cookware ever will. Native American pottery was engineered for work, real work, and the same vessel often carried out several tasks across its lifespan. For cooking, pots needed to survive direct contact with heat. Thick-walled woodland vessels were built with rounded bases so flames could wrap around them evenly. Southwestern jars, although lighter, handled simmering stews without fracturing because their walls distributed heat slowly. Some pots were placed directly into embers. Others were suspended above a fire using wooden tongs or clay tripods. The clay wasn't fragile, it was engineered to endure constant thermal stress. Storage was just as important. Seed jars in the Southwest had small openings to protect grain from pests. Large containers in the Southeast were wide enough for scooping maize or nuts. Some were coated with plant pitch to store water safely for long periods. Others sealed dried meat or berries for winter. Every shape had a job. Then came trade. Pottery traveled astonishing distances. A decorated bowl made in the Mississippi Valley might end up hundreds of miles away, carried along river routes and exchanged at gatherings. Fine-line Caddo vessels, salt trade pots, and polished Pueblo bowls weren't only functional. They were valuable items that signaled craftsmanship, connection, and regional identity. Some pots lived a different kind of life entirely. Carved effigy vessels shaped like animals or human figures were made for ceremonies rather than cooking. Others held offerings, ashes, or tokens meant for important transitions. Their forms were intentional, their purposes understood clearly within the community. A single pot could cook meals, store harvests, travel with traders, and participate in moments that marked the turning points of life. Its usefulness didn't end until it broke, and even then, its fragments often became grog to strengthen the next generation of pottery. These vessels worked tirelessly. Their lives were as dynamic as the people who shaped them. There's also the lesson of functional shaping. Every ancient pot had a clear role. Wide-mouthed clay pots encouraged communal meals. Narrow-necked jars protected stored seeds. Rounded bases improved cooking stability. Instead of designing for aesthetics first, ancient makers shaped vessels to match real needs. Modern potters who study these forms often find themselves returning to that same principle: purpose before appearance. Finally, ancient pottery demonstrates unreasonable durability without chemicals or clay surface naturally. Shell temper strengthened vessels without synthetic additives. Pitch-lined jars provided waterproofing that lasted for years. These techniques weren't relics of a simpler time. They solved challenges that every potter still encounters today. And they show that innovation doesn't always require technology. Sometimes it comes from understanding materials deeply and shaping them with intention.